Hello, Happy New Year, listeners. Welcome to the first edition in 2025, even though we're covering 2024 of the Cyber Threats Xposed podcast. I'm Tim, and I'm joined by Steve as per.
Hello.
And we're going to cover everything. Actually, it feels like an eon ago now, but we're going to cover everything that happened in the realm of cyberspace in December 2024. As like many in our fields, we are grappling with this kind of arbitrary and self-imposed epoch boundary that we've passed going into January the 1st. And now, even though we've got a kind of continuation of all the events in cyberspace, we are forced to treat it like it was an age past, and we are in a new realm. However, we're going to break down those walls today and cover some of the stories from last year, of which quite a few have actually come through into 2025. So, I mean, December's always quite an odd month in terms of, well, I guess maybe every industry, to be honest, Steve. I don't know if you've ever worked in anything else, but, there's a bit of a wind down. It seems that...
I think everybody in retail is hating you right now for that bit of a wind down.
Yeah, that's a bloody good point, actually. I shouldn't...
I feel like December should be a big month for card skimmers and the like, but...
Yeah, it is, and you always get the alerts and notifications around Black Friday scams as well, which is kind of really, really fruitful for those kind of nefarious actors. That's slightly out of scope for what we deal with, I think. Here we're looking at kind of vulnerabilities and enterprise security as opposed to personal kind of cyber-enabled crime, but it's still a really, really real risk. I think you've convinced me. I take back everything I said.
This podcast is brought to you in association with Phoenix Software, a proud WithSecure partner. Phoenix Software enables organizations of all shapes and sizes to innovate, transform, and deliver smart, connected services to not only their users, but beyond that to those they serve on a daily basis. Based in York, United Kingdom, Phoenix Software has been serving the UK public sector for more than 30 years.
We did have quite a lot of vulnerabilities in December, across Fortinet, Palo Alto, Avanti, WordPress, Apache Struts, Cisco. A lot of events around kind of geopolitics. We've had the elections in Romania being delayed has caused a lot of impact within cyberspace. We're going to touch slightly on that, I think, around the ransomware side. And, of course, big stories around Salt Typhoon, Chinese state-sponsored APT, targeting US telecommunications organizations. There's been some speculation that that's coming to Europe as well. We don't know. We don't know the limit to this. And obviously telecommunications agencies are quite often multinational. So there's probably more that will come out around that story. But
yes,
certainly got a few people concerned.
Yep.
In any case, should we just dive straight into what you've deemed to be the kind of most impactful for the European market in December?
Yes. Yeah. So I think it's the impactful and important. And the thing that came up for me was kind of cloud identity, cloud security incidents. So there's been a couple this month that have come up. One involved Volkswagen, and so that made the mainstream media, at least in Germany, because obviously it's a very big thing in Germany. And essentially, they left access keys for an Amazon cloud storage instance unsecured online and publicly accessible to anyone who had the means to do so for about 6 months. and that left terabytes of data exposed. So they reckon there's about data on 800,000 VW Group, so Seat, Audi, etc. Vehicles, just left exposed. And that data linked to the names and contact details of the drivers of those vehicles. And for 460,000 of them contained, precise, up-to-date or geolocation data for them. Now, that's bad generally, and it's bad specifically because this included precise location data for example, Hamburg Police's entire fleet of electric police vehicles. A number of German politicians who, as I said, could have been found by name and contact details. And also you could search geographically. So you could put in, for example, the location of any intelligence services or, similar worldwide and find out what electric vehicles were going there every day. So this was just a big fail, really. And they resolved it quickly. Chaos Computer Club got involved. And they said that, once they got in touch with the owners of the data, they removed the keys, but they were there for 6 months. They were accessible. And it's not great. Though these keys, little strings of data just completely give access to anybody to do anything if you've got them. And it's not
password and Xposed, right? It's just password.
It's password. It is your identity in binary form, really. And that is unfortunate. I mean, this was leaving them public. Another case where someone left access keys public was, in fact, some cyber criminals who had been running a kind of AWS scanning campaign where they would look for insufficiently secured cloud environments, go in and take any access keys, data, anything they could find. And so they had about 2 terabytes of data they'd stolen. However, they misconfigured their own Amazon storage instance and left it all publicly accessible. So researchers came along, and as well as all of the victims' data and access keys and so on, there were logs, the logs for the scanning tools they were using. There were the tools they were using. And they even found some keys that allowed them to link this to the Nemesis black market, which is a place where people go and sell stolen data. And they found that these criminals had stolen something like 1,500 AWS credentials, the contents of 8,000 private buckets, and 256,000 exposed Git repositories. So quite a lot of unsecured data there, which then ironically was left unsecured. And that gives us a really good understanding. I mean, people do, security researchers scan the cloud for insecured instances. They can let people know that they're not correctly secured. And that's how researchers found this one,
Yeah. It's a big problem because, the way that we have looked to address the high volume of easily guessable or leaked passwords is to implement multi-factor authentication on this. You can't do this with secrets like API keys, right? Because this is designed so instead of a human accessing with a username and password, this is a computer accessing with an authentication key, an API key, and enables it to programmatically interact with all the data. So multi-factor is not really a possible solution here, and it is a symptom not of laziness but of human nature. I think in terms of the developers and the development environment, and it's not representative of advances in attacker capability. I mean, these are own goals.
Yep, absolutely. Now there is one story in this theme, which is about really more attacker capability, and this was the Beyond Trust compromise.
Yes,
which is slightly ironically named at this point. I don't think this is what they were going for when they called it that. I think they meant beyond in a good way, and this is kind of beyond in another way. And what seems to have happened is that, so Beyond Trust, the Beyond Trust compromise, you might also know as the US Treasury compromise, because Chinese state actors compromised Beyond Trust, who provide, amongst other things, a sort of cloud-based remote support, remote management tool. They got on their network and were able to steal API keys. And with those API keys, they could then access customer remote support solutions. The attackers used the API keys they'd stolen from Beyond Trust to compromise some of their customers, which were departments of the United States Treasury. Now, Beyond Trust found out about this because it was activity on their network, and then notified the people who'd been compromised around the 8th of December. But during their investigation, they found some more vulnerabilities. Now, it appears that these vulnerabilities were probably exploited by the actors. It seems that one of them is unauthenticated, I believe, and one of them is authenticated and allows you to execute.
Need credentials to exploit it.
And I was looking at it, and there was a bit of update recently that said, this vulnerability was exploited in the wild. And you look at it and it goes, someone with admin access can execute operating system level commands. And I was like, oh, that's a bit weird. Until I remembered this is the one where they stole API keys. So they could create admin users. And so what the attackers were able to do essentially was they compromised the network of the supplier. They got into the supplier's, a dev environment, whatever, got the API keys, got into the cloud, and the cloud-based service that they were providing to their customers. And then they were able to start doing things in the customer's network and compromise the customer's network. And because they had admin access in the cloud there, what they could then do was start, with this vulnerability, start executing commands on the operating system. So that really does show, we've had two cases here of just insecured cloud credentials. These were secured cloud credentials, but the sort of the level of trust that was in place was there to be abused when one of those entities was compromised.
And you refer to the attackers there. This has been largely cited as being China state-sponsored activity.
Yes.
And it again,
no information either way on that, but yes.
Yes. I mean, that's just what's being reported, I should hasten to add. It's not something that we've seen firsthand. But, again, it's that supply chain attack vector, isn't it? You have an inherent level of trust in your vendors, and you have outsourced some level of control to ensure this is done. And it is kind of worth noting that, in fairness, zero-day vulnerabilities do exist and they do happen. So that's not always down to negligence. Quite often it's just one of those things. So when you are dealing with kind of highly capable actors such as Chinese state actors, you're going to kind of run into these issues, but it does provide a bit of a headache, doesn't it, for the kind of data controllers in the US government particularly.
Yes, and they've had quite a lot of headaches recently, I think.
They have.
That's my assessment there.
Okay,
yes.
So the key takeaways are secure your keys.
Yeah. No, secure your keys and know who you're trusting.
Yeah.
You got to. Now something else. So we've mentioned VPNs, VPN servers, gateways, boxes in dark closets. But something that we have heard less about recently has been the VPN client software. But there's actually been some research that was published and a tool that was published that specifically focuses on VPN client software. So the software that runs on an enterprise like desktop that allows you to connect and maintain your connection to the VPN and pretend that you're local to the remote network. Now, the way that lots of this software works, all the different brands and types and so on often share certain functionality. And one kind of piece of functionality is enforcing, you must have a certain levels of different types of software. You must have certain patches installed, this kind of thing. And if you don't, you get cut off from the VPN till you update.
Mm-hmm. I get that all the time.
Now, yeah. You're regularly saying, oh no, I've been cut off from the VPN again. Exactly. But what that kind of means is that the VPN client has to enact these things that the VPN server requests. Like, here are some patches, go and install them, that kind of thing. And it was found that VPN clients kind of implicitly trust the servers they connect to. And it was found then that you could set up a rogue VPN server, i.e. an attacker-controlled server. And if you could trick or induce your intended victim to connect to your server, you have the possibility then of making them install certain software, that you specify, i.e. execute commands that you are passing to them as a privileged local user.
Oh dear.
So this was found to affect SonicWall and Palo Alto VPN clients. There's some vulnerabilities. They're slightly different in each case. Some of them require more pre-positioning and the like than the others, but in some cases it did appear to just be you need to connect to a VPN. And the researchers provided a kind of proof of concept tool they called Nacho VPN, which I assume stands for not your VPN.
The old cheese joke. The old Mexican cheese. Yep. Okay. I get it.
And so this is kind of it's an interesting thing because there's not been much said about VPN clients, but obviously VPN clients and VPN servers, if there's all these issues with the servers, there's not going to be much of a distance between the server code bases and the client code bases, I would think. I can think of lots of reasons why I might be wrong having said that, but it's an assumption you could make. And what's concerning to me is that, as I said initially, lots of these solutions function in a similar way. And in the past, people have found vulnerabilities in a certain, implementation that there are similar ones in other implementations as well. So yes, this has found these vulnerabilities in Palo Alto and SonicWall, but that functionality, I'm certain, is present in other VPN solutions. So there may well be similar issues around rogue servers.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, this is really interesting to me. I think it's worth kind of noting that this is research derived. This is not coming off the back of incidents, and to our knowledge, this hasn't been exploited.
No.
Can you confirm? Yeah, good. But again, we're back on the same. Maybe we've got a theme today in today's podcast, Stephen. It's about that kind of inherent levels of trust, and the ability to kind of perform these kind of commands.
Yeah, I think that inherent trust is a good one. I mean, lots of things, phishing and stuff like that, are abusing trust, but there's certain level of trust you have to give in order to function with modern cloud services, with client server comms like this.
So what do you do?
And with some of the other topics.
If you're a listener now, and on the very remote chance you don't have any kind of runbooks in place that prevent, or policies in place that prevent your VPN client from connecting to an erroneous server, what's the kind of control you can put in? Is there anything you can do?
Well, you can try. You can try and block your, you can set up blocking your, specific processes connecting to certain places. It comes back to that thing of it's more secure to whitelist than to blacklist. So, if you can ensure that only the things you want to happen can happen, because then when someone thinks up some new devious bad thing, you don't have to go and specifically block it. Now, obviously, whitelisting does mean that you can't necessarily. It makes you a bit more inflexible if you think of a new thing that you want to do, which is blocked by your current methods. But that's the balance.
There's some things you don't want to be flexible, I guess. Okay, right. Hard code your servers.
Exactly.
Excellent.
Exactly.
Should we move on then?
Yeah. Where do you want to go next?
Let's talk about ransomware. I think this is, as ever, I think probably one of the biggest kind of threats and risks that organizations face. Big impact. And I think, unfortunately, the numbers have been going really in the wrong way since winter of 2024, I guess. I think, I've said the wrong way, actually. December's numbers from ransomware leak sites, and usual caveats apply. This is kind of attacker-led data. It kind of shows where victims haven't met the demands, et cetera. And numbers were down from November, which is positive. But to put that in perspective, numbers in November were the highest ever, the second highest ever. and and the second highest ever after the kind of move it incidents of Klopp in the summer of 2023.
Did you just say move it?
I did. I wonder why you were dancing. So yeah, this is actually a really serious topic, Steve. I think actually it's good to get the jokes out now.
Say it wasn't.
Yeah, so numbers are down from November, although that's not necessarily that good a thing. I mean, obviously it's positive, but they are the highest December we've had on record. Kind of traditionally, numbers are a bit lower in December than they usually are, and December this year was the fourth highest of all of the months that we've had through 2024. So that's kind of pretty high. We've obviously come to the end of the year now, so we can look at the kind of retrospective. And of course, it's important to note that the movement of time from January to December is arbitrary. There are no real kind of boundaries that are respected by friend and foe alike. But December the entirety of 2024 did see a moderate rise from 2023. I think.
Yep. It's not gone away.
It's not gone away. I mean, it's here, and the rate of increase has slowed. I think.
Yeah,
that is.
I think that's important. Because with the people might go, we were talking about all those law enforcement takedowns earlier in the year. Surely the number should go down, and we don't know what the number would have been without those law enforcement takedowns.
That's correct. I think one thing we do know though is there was a marked drop in numbers just immediately after the law enforcement action of Lockbit, Opchronos, and Black Cat. So essentially, if I'm going to have to try and paint a picture with into your imaginations, but if you essentially see a graph that is rising, that falls below the trend line for the months immediately after the Lockbit takedown, before then kind of rising quite sharply to finish the year, quote unquote, relatively strongly. So the good news is there are some kind of green shoots of, law enforcement action has impacted positively. The bad thing is it doesn't appear that impact has been permanent and full time. There are some kind of ongoing discussions happening at the moment. I think certainly in the UK, at least, the National Cybersecurity Centre have asked for opinions from people and are exploring kind of banning ransomware payments in certain industries like hospitals. I think we'll kind of probably cover that in January's podcast. But ransomware still going strong. There are a lot of as a service and ransomware data leak sites that we're tracking, much more in 2024 than 2023. So 98 in total that we observed, at least with WithSecure. Whereas in 2023 there was 67, although 37 of the 98 that we tracked had less than 10 victims posted. Now, doesn't necessarily mean they're not successful.
Could be their chosen method of operation, couldn't it? That they don't want to post, or they're intentionally like lowballing or whatever. Who knows?
Perhaps. But this fracturing it's a bit of a problem, right? Because there's no kind of clear target anymore. There's no real industry leader. I guess Ransom Hub has emerged, but that is a conglomerate of various different kind of intrusion sets and actors. It's unlikely that because one particular ransomware data leak site has stopped posting, that the actors who were posting to it are no longer operating in ransomware. They are just looking at a different ransomware site. So there is much more kind of fluidity, I think, in the brands. On quite a lot of ransomware. Go on.
I think I'm right in saying that various people have, were saying middle of last year that it looks like there is possibly a move to more lower ransom demands and payments and fewer big bank breaking ones. And I think that's kind of kind of important to consider. When we do look at numbers, we're not looking at necessarily kind of level of impact or quantifiable impact and so on. So, as you know, I just had a look at we had a look at the EU focused kind of ransomware threats and so on. And it's that thing that, Ransom Hub it was the biggest kind of international kind of threat just by numbers, by claimed numbers. But it's sort of interesting to note that, groups like Akira, I think it was, they posted similarly like over 100 victims in Q4, but like only I think 10 of them were necessarily EU, and obviously a lot of those are going to be US or whatever else. But I think we're seeing more ransom attacks in those less profitable areas. So I think Africa, for example, has been getting pounded a bit, and we've been hearing about ransom groups out of Africa as well. So FunkSec, I think, seemingly down there. So yeah, it's an interesting one. We try and assess it as best we can, but there's a lot of variables. Is kind of what I'm saying on this one.
We'll be watching with interest, I think, in the analysis that the cryptocurrency companies have, because that's also a really interesting and unique insight. And actually, because by definition, right, transactions on the blockchain are visible.
It's always 2 billion.
It's always 2 billion, but you can always see. You can always see. Quite often these kind of companies can track, payments that they think are going to ransomware actors, and their analysis is always really important to complement the analysis that we do looking at the data leak sites, because it does have a different set of biases. So we can start to make sensible assumptions based on kind of the two different perspectives on the same problem. So that's something we'll be keeping an eye out for eagerly. But as I say, the bad news is ransomware hasn't gone away. It's not likely to go away. It's possibly even going to increase. The good news is we have demonstrated that law enforcement action, and can make a positive difference. So then the mission now becomes, how can we impose costs to the way that temporary benefit becomes permanent?
Yeah. Yeah. And, and moving beyond the stats, there have been some sort of specific things that have happened, or that happened in December as well, in that ransomware front. So Lockbit, speaking of takedowns and the like, they came out with an announcement that they're going to be soon, at some point, launching Lockbit 4.0, which is apparently what they were working on before the takedown. Who knows around that?
Well, also referred to as Lockbit Green. I think they have registered some domains in the dark web. I think there was a few Lockbit victims onto Lockbit 3's blog post recently as well. So there are some rumblings and signs of a re-emergence. How successful that will be, we don't know.
Yes, yeah, that's the thing. It's kind of there's definitely questions around the health and functionality of their operation, because so many affiliates, it's just a brand the affiliates are induced to post under, and so many of them move to other brands, other groups. But similarly, that same kind of fluidity of allegiance in the kind of the ransomware market, that could allow them to lure affiliates back to them. It's just a case of, is there, can they present themselves as a battle-scarred something, I don't know, or are they a goner? Are they old news?
And I'm a bit worried that we're kind of referring to ransomware groups as we might an organization with a strategy and looking at numbers and facts and figures, but we need to kind of remind ourselves every now and again just how deplorable they actually are. I mean, there's been, campaigns targeting kind of Romanian democracy ultimately, kind of off the fallout of the whole kind of geopolitical situation there, just as a kind of really brief reminder, and obviously a really basic one because I'm not an expert in this field, but following kind of waves of populism around kind of Romanian relatively unknown TikTok kind of campaigns forced Romanian authorities to postpone the election. That has led to a lot of cyber attacks, kind of denial of service and ransomware as well. So it does appear there is at least some kind of concerted campaign targeting Romania. And of course, INC ransomware have claimed an attack on a UK children's hospital. It's as kind of as low as a human being could get, targeting this kind of organization. So, we shouldn't run the risk of being a bit too blasé and talking about facts and percentages and statistics. This is something that has kind of real human impact as well. So
yes, it's easy to go, oh, some business lost some money, but yeah, when we're talking about hospitals and healthcare, which are such common, targets now, and you could say that it seems that they are targets because of what they are and because they must get operational quickly, and that is what they want. They want urgency and they want impact to force people to pay.
Well, we covered that before. While the eyes of the world are on artificial intelligence, and that's the theme, we covered ransomware first because we still believe it is a primary threat. It's the primary threat to most organizations, particularly in and around Europe and the US. And if you're connected on the internet, you are at kind of risk. So we can move on from that now, and we can cover artificial intelligence.
It's pretty brief. A number of sounds I can make with my mouth, honest. So it's moving on to AI. It's pretty brief. So there's a campaign that's been reported by some researchers running AWS honeypots, and the campaign is seeking to hijack the AWS LLM hosting functionality Bedrock. So once they get access, they try and invoke the Anthropic Claude LLM models, and all of the access attempts that were observed by the researchers came from a number of a Proton VPN addresses, and this is probably going to get more common. I've heard about similar things in the past, but yeah, it's going to get more common. This hunting for unsecured LLM functionality, because it's compute power. Compute power is a paid resource now. That's what clouds offer. And if you have a resource that people are paying for, then it is something that can be stolen and repurposed or resold for financial gain.
So this was a resource jacking attack, was it?
Yeah, basically. Yes, but specifically LLM, which is interesting because I've also seen some stuff around people doing the cloud resource jacking who were ignoring LLMs. They were doing everything else apart from LLMs. So it does show you've got to be set up. There's got to be somewhere monetizing this, and some people are, some criminals are going after LLM functionality, and some are just ignoring entirely.
Well, this is interesting. I think it's kind of worth noting. I mean, by definition, right, an LLM has to be relatively high powered. If you are running your own, you can't run a large language model on a Raspberry Pi, for example.
Not well.
Well, somebody might write in and tell me that I'm wrong there, but that's at least my assumption. You need some kind of process capability, which is, of course, ideal for a crypto miner. One of the things that I spend a bit of time, we spend a bit of time unpicking is where do these kind of hypothetical researcher-led attacks targeting AI? It's a conversation that a lot of people are having. Where is the line between hypothetical and research-driven academic to this is actually what's happening and what we're seeing at the moment? Now, in the same way that with kind of the Web3 gold rush, people stood up services and systems really quickly, really rapidly. Some kind of individual organizations, and some at the request of a kind of high power individual in their organization saying, right, you now must do Web3, and somebody says you must now do AI, and you stand up, and security isn't at the forefront of your mind, right? You're looking at speed, you're looking at kind of other KPIs, and therefore they are vulnerable. Are people targeting LLMs here because they're LLMs, or because they are just vulnerable and high spec that just so happen to be? large language models?
I think in order to monetize them, they have to have some kind of use for them or market for them. So I think the targeting is because they can monetize access to them. They can monetize the functionality. It being successful and continued is based on it being insecure. Yeah. So the initiator is, hey, we can make money from this. And that's what I think, basically. Considering, as I said, having seen that some groups are, we're going in and creating, finding an insecure environment and creating certain types of resource to access certain types of compute. And they were ignoring LLMs and going in a very traditional way, whereas this group were entirely focused on LLMs.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
This is interesting because it's important that we maintain perspective with LLMs. I think the way that we've seen its use in offensive cybersecurity has been through industrialization of what was already possible and relatively straightforward, right? Coding, developing kind of phishing page, efficiency boosters and assistances, lowering the barrier to entry to some actors, etc., but not really nudging forwards. We don't have an awful lot of examples of kind of the bare metal, the bare metal elements of a kind of large language model or generative AI in use by enterprise being targeted by adversaries yet. So it's important that we kind of keep our eye on that and understand how it works, because at the moment we are at the top of a hype cycle, and we are throwing out, like I say, we are in theory mode for a lot of these kind of more advanced attacks. So that's why
throw your hands in the air and enjoy the ride down to the trough of disillusionment. My favorite part of the hype cycle.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say before somebody kind of reminds me of this in 6 months' time, that I'm actually not. I'm not kind of entrenched in this position. I'm not. I don't want to be on record as to say we are at the top of the hype cycle and it's all downhill from here. I still think there is some more. There is some more development yet to be had, and things are going to get. We're going to get in bed more and more and more with artificial intelligence, not less and less and less. So,
whether you like it or not.
Yeah, I don't want to be like the opposite of the Simpsons. Just these kind of terrible. If you one must be aware of making bad predictions lest you be called out upon on a separate video. So
software supply chain is our next segue, and actually kind of ties a bit into some recent. Well, so it's recent. It's some of the other things you mentioned. So the Ultralytics AI libraries build pipeline was compromised. Very, very specifically, the build pipeline was compromised. What ended up happening is that there was an action script which did some things in a particular way, and the way it functioned was exploited by an attacker to inject some commands and some code into the build pipeline. But what they did is essentially they put commands into the name of the branch they were committing. They pushed it. They force pushed it, and they immediately deleted it. Now, these words may make no sense to you. They make very little sense to me. But essentially, they were able to push a command injection into the kind of the engine of creation, which is the build pipeline. And what the result of this was that some malicious functionality, some malicious code was included and kind of popped out the bottom that wasn't visible at the top. So the source code in GitHub was not the same, was not the source code that was used to generate the software that was coming out the bottom of the build pipeline. And that is, that's really bad, because that's how that going and looking at the source code to see what something does, that's how you find out what it does. Otherwise, you're reverse engineering or something. Now, obviously, if you've got, trying to tell this has happened through any way other than seeing that something bad is going on and then trying to work out at which point it was introduced is difficult. But fortunately, because this is a library that was used by developers, there were some people who were developers who found out this thing had happened. And they went and investigated and found out that, yes, there was a difference in the code. And then they identified that, there was a vulnerable action script there and that there was a previous known kind of vulnerability that had been exploited in this way. And so they were able to identify it and sort it out. Now, fortunately, in this case, it appears that all they did was cryptojacking. Yeah. So they did this very stealthy and interesting attack, and they just did some cryptojacking, which is really noisy and really obvious, and was picked up on. And it's kind of, well, thank God they didn't do something destructive or stealthy or steal keys or credentials or whatever. Yeah, but that's what they did, cryptojacking on this.
Is cryptojacking always noisy and obvious?
It is not always noisy and obvious, no. But I would say the fact that it is often noisy and obvious may tell us that they are successful enough at exploiting things they can do cryptojacking on that they benefit more from mining more quicker and then getting found quicker than they do from staying there longer.
It's one that flies under the radar quite a lot, cryptojacking, and it's because there isn't an awful lot of kind of impact, I guess, a lot of the time. That can be, obviously, in some cases it's not the case, but, very often there's not much impact. It's not very sexy, so we don't report on it quite a lot as an industry. But they are quite dark horses, these cryptojackers. I mean, this feels like a really neat intrusion, pretty good tradecraft.
Yep.
So the build pipelines of software is kind of crown jewels for a lot of hackers. I mean, just go back to SolarWinds. We all know about SolarWinds, and that was where the build pipeline was compromised or something. So this is kind of no mean feat, and it shows good tradecraft. And I guess this is just me saying, don't underestimate cryptojackers just because they're not that sexy, and just because they don't get written about much, and because they're not an existential threat to most businesses, I guess.
Exactly, and that's probably the way they like it.
Yeah,
they probably don't want to be written about. They want to be splashed across the headlines and getting task forced or whatever.
I think it would be fascinating to see how much money is lost to cryptojacking.
Well, and this is another place that the tracking cryptocurrency kind of comes in.
So a lot of it's in
allegedly,
isn't it?
Well, yeah. Allegedly, in this case, they believe that it was active for such a short time that they made a very small amount of money. Very small, but it's interesting from the security viewpoint. On the flip side, there was a rather more traditional software supply chain compromise, where the account of a developer of a cryptocurrency library, Solana Web3.js, a developer account was compromised, and malicious code was inserted, and there was it was kind of intelligently inserted. So what the code did was they inserted it into the various places in that library where private keys for crypto stuff are handled, and it would steal the private key and send it to the attacker's controlled server. Now this was rapidly identified, because a developer account suddenly pushed an unexpected, version and so on. It was identified and removed 5 hours later, but even in that brief time, attackers were able to steal private keys from downstream victims. And they are estimated to have stolen about $160,000 in cryptocurrency in that time as a result of this. So that's pretty good for them. Pretty bad for not them.
Yeah, yeah. This, cryptocurrency is kind of heavily targeted, I guess. But with that, I think we've kind of come full circle from the top of the recording, where we talked about large organizations accidentally leaving API keys exposed, to actual kind of relatively sophisticated attacks targeting specific API keys, and costing kind of tens, hundreds of thousands of pounds of loss. So it's a really nice example of kind of how we've left an API key exposed for a little bit, but nothing bad came of it. Isn't really the right attitude.
Yes,
people actively target API keys. So
exactly, yeah. It's
and private keys.
The whole web of trust and so on is going on as well may mean that the person who is best placed to detect the bad things that may have happened may not be the most informed either, and so on and so forth. So,
okay, I think with that, it would be a shame to mention anything else, because we've wrapped it all in a kind of neat bow, I think.
Yeah, I can accept that.
Shall we say cheerio then, and see you guys soon for what is actually shaping? I'm giving you guys a peek behind the curtain, but we are recording this in January. Something that is shaping up to be pretty busy January, I'm afraid. So try and block 2 hours next month.
Well, yeah, it's definitely time to say goodbye. And obviously at this point, I am maybe legally, if not culturally, obliged to say Happy New Year. But from this point forward, it's no Happy New Year. It's just going to be year. It's just going to be miserable year to everybody.
Yeah. Have a year. Have a year.
Exactly.
Thank you. Exactly. Goodbye.
Cheers.
This podcast was brought to you by Phoenix Software, a proud WithSecure partner. For more information, search Phoenix Software